than Amos Fox. He's written many articles. Again, he's the editor of the Small Wars Journal, which I'm a big fan of. So again, sir, so glad you came. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so General Sellers and Colonel Broyles, thanks a ton for the opportunity. It's my first time back in the Fort Lewis area in about 25 years. I came here as a ROTC cadet and did advanced camp here back when it was here. I know the name's changed, but here we are. So anyway, thank you for having me. It's a great turnout, so thank you all for coming out. I know probably a lot of you were told to come out, but hey, you're here. So we got that going for us. The other thing I think is important is always for me personally, I like getting my biases out there, because when I sit in the audience, because I am a critical prick, I sit and think, what is this person's biases when they're up there talking? All right, so I'm just going to lay mine out there for you so you have some of those. So I started off as I was going to be a football coach and a teacher, or I was going to be a teacher and a football coach. And so my background, my undergrad and my master's were in secondary education. I ended up teaching coaching football for a couple years at Butler University before I came into the Army. And so the teacher, the learning, the coaching aspect of things is ingrained in my mind. And so when I look at something in the coaching world, as this season more than any others have made apparent, if you don't win, you lose, right? And you get fired if you're the head coach or if you're a coordinator. And so that aspect of you've always got to try and find the way to win got burned in my mind at a young age, right? In my early 20s before I came in the Army. And so I've always looked at things through that lens. It's always about what the hell do we got to do to win, right? And so if it isn't that, then what is it? And so that's a bias that I have and that I bring to the fore when I do everything I do. The other thing, so I retired as I was an armor officer, retired armor officer, did all armor officer jobs. My whole career up until the tail end, General Agudo was my regimental commander when I was in Black Horse. Sorry, it's still burned in my mind. So General Agudo was my regimental commander. I was a tank company commander for him at the NTC when we went back to the decisive action rotation. So I got to participate in the fight against 3-3 ID many years ago, and that was what got the NTC moving back away from the Afghanistan and Iraq rotations and moving towards what was then called decisive action. I don't know what it's called now. But anyway, so there's that, right? And so when I look at warfare, I look at it through that lens, right, a tanker's lens, because I predominantly was in armored units. And so it's moving fast, shooting far, right, and doing so from a fairly protected position, at least in relation to a lot of other people on the battlefield. So that's one of the lenses that I look at things through. The other part is that I'm retired. I'm an international relations scholar. I focus primarily on conflict and war and strategy. And so now I don't have to be indoctrinated the same way that all of you do, right? And so I can look at things differently, apply different lenses, and talk about things, with a different language. I try and speak as much in plain English as opposed to institutional jargon as possible. And so that's also a bias that may get in the way of things. But those are really the big things that I wanted to highlight as it relates to that. All right, so that's me, that's who I am. I also, because I don't like seeing people look at me, take my glasses off so I can't see anybody's face, so now you guys can roll your eyes freely, and it won't affect me. I won't get that like, oh God, they're making fun of me in my stomach. All right, so I am a professor at Arizona State. I teach a couple of things there. I teach understanding conflict and war. I teach security studies, the future of war. Today's the last day of the semester, in fact. I teach that with Peter Singer, Ghost Fleet guy. And then I teach strategy and international relations and intro to IR as well. So teach a lot, and part of it for me is teaching is about learning. I enjoy learning, and really if I could be a full-time student and just get paid to go learn stuff, I would take that job, but unfortunately that's not available. And then the other part of that is Small Wars Journal, which you already mentioned. All right, so my goal today really is to help get everybody thinking critically about the future of war, all right? Why is it that we believe what we believe? What are the things that are being advocated for, the ideas, the technologies, and why are they being advocated for as opposed to something else? Why are we advocating for the doctrines that we're advocating for? And are there other ways, different ways, better ways to approach war and warfare? All right, and the idea is to help prepare everybody for the future of conflict and war. All right, there are many continuities. This is a dirty word. I did a presentation in Paris at the École Militaire, pardon my French, literally. I don't speak French, but I did that a couple years ago. And when I got done in the Q&A, some really smart person in the back of the room stood up and was like, oh, you just talked about continuities. And I said, yeah, because they matter, right? And so we can sit and bang the drum about how all these things are changing and how there are these so-called revolutions in military affairs, but by and large, a lot of those become quickly just standard practice really fast. And so continuities are important to understand. And so we'll talk a bit about those today, but I want you to walk away not saying, this thing's a continuity and so it's bad. Legacy systems, artillery, right? We need to move away from artillery because it's a legacy system. All right, there are all sorts of legacy things, continuities that are still critically important. All right, and then lastly, for those of you who may touch .mil PFP, right, I want you to keep some of the things I say in mind as you walk away from here and touch those things, specifically as it relates to doctrine, organizations, right, military organizations, and training, because there's a lot of what's reality that's getting pushed aside for the sake of technology and trying to be cool and FOMO, right? Everybody's got the fear of missing out. Look at all the cool drones. We got to get drones. Well, I don't know that we necessarily do or don't, all right? And so I say all that to say, A, I'm not a maneuver fanatic, all right? I'm actually not a anything fanatic. I'm a scholar of war, all right? So I try and look at things empirically and say, what is reality and what does that mean for the future? Okay, so I've been sometimes called an attritionist. I initially got pissed when somebody said that to me, but then I was like, whatever, man, it doesn't matter. So, anyway, next slide, please. So I say that to say I've written a ton, right? And this is all, not all, a lot of it is empirically based research, all right? So again, I threw up a ton of crap just so you guys could see that I'm not just some dude standing up here talking at you, all right? And this is, I have over 100 publications, so this is just a very small select thing. But the book here, right, so this came up this week, all right? Doesn't actually say that maneuver's dead, okay? But the way that we think about it is dead, and we need to be thinking about maneuver differently. And I'll talk a bit about that here in a little bit. And then this book, Conflict Realism, came out last year. It talks about how we need to take a realistic and not an aspirational approach to thinking about and understanding war and warfare, all right, because aspiration's great. So I forgot to mention this at my intro. I'll skip it. All right, but we got to take a realistic look at things, okay? And we're really not doing that. We're taking a lot of aspiration, a lot of hope, a lot of FOMO, right? And saying that's what we need to be doing. That's the future of war, when in reality there are many continuities that we need to consider moving forward. I'm going to talk a little bit too about air ground littoral. If I have more time, I'd talk a lot about it. I think it's great. Jim Greer has done a lot of good work on that, and that's what got it started in my mind. And then I've done a ton of work on attrition and maneuver and positional warfare. And so this is a quick story. So no kidding, there I was, decisive action, rotation 1202. Was that correct? I know you did a million, so did I. But anyway, so we just finished the DA rotation with 3-3-ID. I was at the squadron headquarters. I was in 1st Squadron, 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment. I was talking to my squadron XO, Jimmy Kimbrough. We were talking through things, and I was explaining what we did and what I was thinking and how we went about fighting. He's like, hey, this book I've read, it sounds a lot about what you're talking about. And it was Fighting by Minutes by Robert Leonard, which is a phenomenal book. So I went and got it, and I read it, and then that's really what got me on the path to standing in front of you right here, right now. So that's the other part, is don't forget conversations, right? Leader to led in any capacity can spur, I guess if you consider this a great thing, right? I do. This can spur great things, right? And so that conversation with him after that rotation, no kidding, got me standing here right now. Got not almost all that stuff, but a lot of that stuff up there on that screen. So don't underestimate or don't devalue the opportunity to just stop and have a chat with one of your people, because it can be far greater than what you realize. So anyway, that's it. Next slide. All right, I'm going to talk about some stuff. This is where you're supposed to laugh. Next slide, please. All right, so the character of war. So again, as somebody that studies this, I want to go through and highlight my take on the character of war. All right, so contemporary conflict today, right, it's characterized by long wars of attrition. I'm sorry, I said the A word, but it's true and it's the reality of things, all right? And what we see is that whoever can strategically exhaust the other in terms of material capacity and or domestic and political will be the one who ends up winning. Why are so many wars so long burning right now? Long wars of attrition? Because those things haven't been positively affected, all right? Right now, we see positional warfare, which is often talked about incorrectly. One of the key things that are being conducted in terms of war fighting, right? And it's often conducted from urban terrain. Why? If you look at what Anthony King's written, he does a great job of explaining a lot of this. Cities have gotten bigger, urban sprawl has gotten bigger, interstate highway, I mean, hell, man, driving from Seattle to here is a nightmare, right? That's gotten bigger. All those things have contributed to the increase in urbanization of warfare, but then also armies are getting smaller, right? So whereas in the past, World War II, armies would consume cities and they would just be a micro event within a large front, that's not the case today. You have very small armies, and what do you do when you're attacked? What's the first thing you do? You take cover. You try and protect yourself. What's a city offer? Protection, right? And so when you think through, we talk about systems, right? What's the first rule of a system? Don't die, right? Cities offer that opportunity. Don't die. Go hide in the city. Fight from the city. Now you find yourself fighting positionally, all right? The other thing, this is the nasty part also that people try and push to the side, but contemporary wars are fought for control of political and territorial things under contest, right? You look at Ukraine. Ukraine's being fought for territory. There's a bunch of other crap that's being said about it. At the end of the day, it's Putin doesn't want Ukraine to exist, right? Politically or as a geopolitical entity all on its own. So they're trying to take that territory, okay? Ukraine, on the other side of the equation, doesn't want to do that, right? This whole 28 points, 19 points, whatever it is now, I don't know, it keeps changing, right? One of the key things that Zelensky keeps pushing back on is giving up the Donbass, giving away Crimea, giving away those 4 oblasts that have been taken for the most part to this point, right? And so it's still about the control of territory, all right? And that is a significant requirement, which gets to one of the key things that I want everybody to take away from today. Contemporary conflict, right? Land wars in particular. It takes an army to win a land war. It doesn't take cool stuff. It takes an army, it takes people. Infantry, armor, artillery, engineers, those types of things, because those are the things that provide the ability to control territory, control populations, and I'll talk a bit more about that in just a moment, all right? And again, at the end of the day, these wars are fought by armies. All the other services, and that's no disrespect, but they support what the army does, right? Sometimes the army, they're doing the shaping and enabling phase of things ahead of time, and so the army hasn't arrived yet, right? Like, what if we can't get to Taiwan to help Taiwan because the Navy can't get there? Okay, well, it hasn't hit that phase of the war yet. I got it, right? But big picture, when we think about a lot of these wars and potential wars, that's key to understand. The other part is, and this is where I do think drones are important, so as I said, I'm not anti-drone at all. I've said that if you listen to my podcast, you'll hear me say that all the time, right? But, and I'm not, because the air-ground littoral is incredibly important to understand. I think Dr. Guru does a terrific job, and the couple things that he's published on that of explaining this concept. I also think that that slide that was at the beginning, there was a really good slide I thought that helped show the echelonment of capabilities. But that's something that we have to really truly figure out, because that is the key to allowing armies to do what armies need to do, which is move, all right? And so, again, we'll talk more about that in just a moment, all right? And the other thing is all these great, cool technologies are terrific and they help, but they don't generate defeat, all right? And that's what we're going to talk a lot about today, is generating defeat. The other problem that I don't have on the slide that I wanted to highlight is we're getting tied up in looking at technology and what technology is doing, but we're not looking at how that technology enables defeat, helps support the ability of forces to control territory. And so while it's great that, pick your actor, they've all got all these drones and we do not, okay? That's FOMO. We can't let FOMO get in the way of understanding what's truly driving defeat, right? And so Ukraine had whatever it was, 400,000 drones a month they're trying to produce. Zelensky said they're the worldwide leader in drone warfare. That doesn't matter. It's only helped them not lose the war. I will also say I'm 100% Team Ukraine, all right? But as a scholar, I look at this as objectively as possible, even though I've already tipped my hand on who I want to win, right? But now Russia has overtaken Ukraine, according to all the news coming out here in the past few weeks on being the worldwide leader in drone warfare. And so Russia has the manpower and the drones. Ukraine does not have the manpower, but the drones. And so when you look at that, right, it makes things even more stark for Ukraine. So you have to understand that just having the tools, right, having HIMARS and long-range precision strike and all these FPVs, that's terrific. But if you don't have the land forces to come in and control terrain or defeat the military that's occupying that terrain, then then you're set up for failure, right? Or at least stalemate. And again, that goes back to why we have positional warfare. All right, next slide, please. All right, key recommendation for anybody is don't change your slide deck the night prior and have brought slides with you that you printed 2 days ago. So some of these slides will be as surprised as you are when they pop up because I don't have the deck in front of me in the same order. All right, so when we look at fighting, and to tie this to fighting outnumbered and winning, one of the key things that I think is important to understand is you don't really fight outnumbered and win, right? You may fight outnumbered and not lose, but you're probably not going to win. And I listed a couple things here, big picture, where we folks tried to fight outnumbered and win, right? If you look at Afghanistan, what did everybody ask for? All the generals in charge of the war. More people, right? I need 20 more thousand people, said Stanley McChrystal. I need 30 more thousand people, said David McKiernan. I got those out of order, right? But all these guys come along and they're like, hey, I need more people, right? I don't need more stuff. I don't need more Burger King. I need more people. All right, when you look at Iraq, the plan initially, right, Shinseki said it's going to take 500,000 people. And the Army said, thank you, sir, the door's that way, right? And then we brought in the 190,000 person plan, and what did we do? We went in and toppled the Iraqi military really fast, and then we found ourselves in chaos because we didn't have the people to control the territory like we needed to, all right? So you may win a battle, you may win an operation outnumbered, but win big picture, and again, I'm focused on big picture. I'm not talking like platoons here, okay? We got to think about it critically, and that's not going to help us win wars. All right, and then I got a couple of other things up here. I already mentioned Russia, Ukraine. One of the things, too, with Israel and Hamas, right? I talked earlier about all the drones going in there, but then after he said drones, he talked about the land force coming in behind, because part of that is occupying, controlling that territory, all right? And there's a difference between being there, sitting on the terrain, and just occupying it and then controlling it. And if you listen a couple episodes ago, in fact, I had Mike Kaufman on my podcast and we were talking about this, and that was one of the key things he was talking about when he talked about Pervrovsk. I don't speak Ukrainian either, so when I try and say these words, they come out really bad. But that was one of the things. There was Russians there, there's Ukrainians there. Neither one of them really control the terrain necessarily. And so that's why it's been going back and forth. I think it's fallen, or maybe not, in the past couple days. So anyhow, next slide, please. All right, so what we got to be thinking about, though, is defeat, right? What is defeat? Defeat is very simple. It's causing your opponent to change their mind about fighting, whether that's the war, whether that's something finitely tactical, right? You have to drive change in their mind. And I'm sorry to tell everybody, but cognitive paralysis is nonsense and doesn't exist, all right? You can't, it's like anybody seen the movie The Minute Stare at Goats? Every time I hear somebody say the phrase cognitive paralysis, I envision George Clooney trying to make a goat fall over, right? From cognitive paralysis, okay? That's not what happens, all right? You have to iteratively engage the opposing force to the point that they say, can I keep fighting, all right? And so, next slide, please. I hope. There we go, okay. This is one of those ones where it's like, I don't know what's coming up. all right? You have to iteratively engage to change the situation, all right? So you're trying to offset, if you are outnumbered, offsetting the fact that you are outnumbered in a way that gives you an advantage, right, to change decision making. And so you've got to iteratively conduct that in an adversarial context. And this is part of the problem with a lot of the doctrine that we have today and the concepts. Again, this is what I forgot to say at the beginning. Concepts, my last job in the Army, I worked at Army Futures Command. I was working on the Army Warfighting Concept for 2040. I love that job so much, and I love working at AFC so much that I decided to retire. Come on, that was funny. Dark humor, all right? But one of the things with that also was, that was supposed to be, we were supposed to have it done in 2 years. I call it like the Guns N' Roses Chinese Democracy album. It took 20 years for Guns N' Roses to make that album, even though it was going to be done in like 2 years, right? That's what that concept's turned into, apparently. I still don't think it's come out. I don't know, though. I've lost all touch with that. But anyway, you have to continually, iteratively re-engage and take re-engage in terms of fighting, however that may apply to whatever echelon, all right? Because, again, I'm not focused on platoons or companies or battalions necessarily. I'm talking big picture, all right? But you have to iteratively engage in fighting or engagement, right, and however you define that, to basically change decisions, right? And there's about 4 decisions. Do I continue fighting? Do I surrender? Do I negotiate? Right, and this is where we're at right now when we look at Russia, Ukraine, right? They're trying to negotiate an end here. Or have I hit strategic collapse, right? Have I exhausted all my resources? Have I exhausted my domestic will? Have I just exhausted the political will to keep this war going? All right? And so those are the things we got to be thinking about when we think about how we should be approaching the future of war and how we should be thinking about warfare, right? The forms of warfare. It's not there's one great omnipotent way of fighting. It's situational. How do I change the situation based off the things that I have? So next slide. Ah, man. The new slides aren't in here, but that's fine. We'll go with this. All right, so the big thing I wanted to say was that there's essentially 3 basic ways of fighting, right? Maneuver, position, and attritional warfare, or not. There's all sorts of people that have debated this. Unlike the people, back to the assholes joke from this morning about opinions and them all stinking, mine's not an opinion, mine's empirical research. So I think you could say mine's better, all right? But it is empirically researched most of the time. And you can look at my track record on all my publications to see that it's not just me ramming out something on Substack, okay? Trust me, if it was that easy, never mind. All right, so maneuver, I have argued, if you read my conflict realism book and a couple of other things I'd said, that's actually a subcategory of positional warfare. Positional warfare is actually the larger thing when we talk about the movement, the combination of movement and fire to gain positions of relative advantage. That's positional warfare. Sorry, it is. All right? The difference is primarily how close are you to whatever the objective is, and do you have room to move? All right? And so I'm going to set that aside. Attrition isn't this dumb way of fighting where you just roll up and say, it's like Terminator or Predator. It was on last night, in fact, so this is helpful. It's one of my favorite movies. It's one of the first movies I remember seeing as a very little kid, right? And there's a couple scenes, when Billy's standing on the log and he cuts his chest with the knife and he's like that. Like, that's not attrition, okay? That's the way it's cast. That's the way a lot of people say attrition is, but it's not, all right? And the other part is like with Arnold laying there on the ground saying, "Here I am, kill me." You know what I'm saying? That part, that's not attrition either. But that's the way a lot of people try and strawman attack attrition to make it sound like it's a 1-for-1 exchange ratio. It's all about solely using firepower and fighting stupid and doing frontal attacks. That's not what it is. Okay, it's far more nuanced than that. And again, if you go back and look at a bunch of the stuff, I've got a paper coming out in RUSI like today, sometime. Anyway, if you look at all that, you can look at that in greater detail, all right? But the one thing I do want to say is don't buy into a lot of the snake oil that's being sold, all right? There's a lot of snake oil in conventional military thought and strategic thought. And the way that maneuver warfare is cast as the way of fighting uber alles, right, is incorrect. All these things interact based off the situation and the conditions on the ground, your location and proximity to your objective, what your objective is, what you have on hand, all right, how much terrain you have to move in. If you don't have any room to move, you're not doing maneuver, right? Like if it's me versus you and we're right here, you're fighting headlong into that if there's no way to get around it. And my book, Maneuver's Dead, goes through and it lays out this idea of battlefield parallax, right? So the closer you get to something, like right now, it would be hard for me to flank you guys because the front's so wide. But if I was, a football field back, I could find a lot more ways to get around you to get to my objective if my objective happened to be the table there in the back, all right? And so that concept is really at the heart of the difference in when maneuver should be applied, when positional warfare should be applied, and when attritional warfare should be applied. The other part of that, philosophies don't win wars, so maneuver's a philosophy, whatever. Those don't win wars, all right? What wins a war is doing what you need to do to generate defeat. And part of that, a huge part of that is control, right? Being able to control the ground, all right? So the other part is multi-domain operations, all right? Sounds great. It's really cool. Got a book on that coming out. I went to the printer today. Everything happened today. I'm not kidding, by the way. Or this week or today. So that book will be up on Amazon really soon, too. But that's a co-edited volume on multi-domain operations that Franz Steffengati and I put together. And it's got folks from the US and from all over the world writing about some of the benefits and some of the shortcomings of MDO. But a lot of the problem with that is it's overly complicated, right? If it gets hacked, if you get hacked, it's going to be really challenging. One of the things I learned at the National Training Center, I don't know if you remember this, sir, but like, what do we do when we can't talk, right? You still got to be able to fight. And we were working through that even then. What happens when the radios go down? And we went out and did a lot of training before that first big rotation to work through a lot of those concepts. And we really fought in a very decentralized way based off the mission and the intent and the goal that we were trying to achieve, right? And so we just have to be careful when we think about things like multi-domain operations. We need to be critical of it and say, hey, here are the shortfalls, right? And again, what was it? Something one of my colleagues told me when I was a brand new lieutenant. He said something like, do what your paycheck is willing to accept, right? So go out and be critical of it, but do what your paycheck's willing to accept, or your spouse. Because there's a lot of people that get riled up, as I saw yesterday with my, hey, here's my Maneuver's Dead book post on social media. Thank you. Where'd you go? Thank you. You were just one of a few, but it's okay. All right. But the other part of that is don't be afraid to push the envelope and challenge what your institution's saying, because there's reasons it says what it says, and those aren't always bound in reality. All right. And so you got to go out and think about why some of those things are being said. The other part, I've talked a bit about drones already, right? They're great for generating, shaping effects and enabling effects, but they can't go occupy territory. And I'll talk more in just a second on that. And then the other thing too with precision strike and standoff warfare, you got to really be careful with that as well for the same reasons. You could take this slide I'm going to show in just a second and do the same analysis with it. But we've got to really not sell off. The point is we have to be careful about selling off our soul in terms of land forces, right? The Army last year and the year before gutted cavalry formations, gutted MPs, gutted engineers, gutted all sorts of things to make cap space for drones and long-range precision strike and multi-domain task forces. And at the end of the day, that's terrific. But then what happens after all those things go in, right? After you've shot your HIMARS, you've shot your GIMLers, and you don't have anything on the ground to go in and clean up or to go in and consolidate gains. I hate that phrase, but consolidate gains. I hate that phrase because when FM30 came out in 2018, 17, I was in Iraq. I was a campaign plan manager. I was doing my SAMS utilization with 1st Armored Division, and that manual came out, and that was the buzz phrase we always had to have in everything. You got to say consolidate gains. So we made a smart-ass little thing on the wall, and it was a bottle of gain It was a bunch of little bottles of gain, and it said something like we're consolidating gains. All right. Planners, when they get bored or get pissed, do funny stuff. All right, next slide. Okay, this is the drone slide. So when I talk about a couple things that land forces have to do, all right, land forces have to be capable of taking territory, retaking territory, clearing threats from the territory, holding territory, sealing boundaries, and protecting populations. Within each one of those requirements, there's two conditions, two baseline conditions, and you could probably dig deeper if you want, but for the simplicity of being able to get up and talk quickly about this, I've outlined two for each, okay? To take territory, and this one and number two, because they're so similar, the conditions are the same. You have to defeat an occupying army, and you have to be able to control contested terrain. To clear threats from territory, the conditions are you have to remove the hostile threat from difficult terrain and then control the contested terrain. To hold territory, you have to be able to defeat counterattacks and control contested terrain. To seal boundaries, you have to control the nexus of the contested area, right? You got to be able to hold that and also prevent counterattacks. That really is part of it as well, right? And then to protect populations, you have to prevent civilian harm and collateral damage and control contested territory, all right? So again, controlling territory is paramount. Now, if you look at drones across the board, they can only do a couple of those things. Arguably, they can defeat an occupying army. Saw that in Nagorno-Karabakh, right? 2020, that's the thing that everybody wants to look and say, future of war, Nagorno-Karabakh. Okay, that's an outlier, that's an anomaly when you look at the history of war, and a N of 1 is not sufficient to validate anything other than preferred opinion. All right, so it can do that. It can also potentially defeat a counterattack, right, if you kill it before it gets to you. But aside from that, drones can't do any of the other stuff that's required in land wars, right? That requires, at least right now, human beings on the ground capable of taking, retaking, holding, clearing, sealing borders, and protecting populations. And so when we think about the future of war, we can't think about that at the cost of this, all right? And you can take this and you can change it out and you can remove drones and you can put long-range precision strike up there, or you can put standoff warfare up there, and you'll have very similar results, all right? This is like, I should have put it in here, I forgot. The underpants gnomes, right? Phase 1, steal drones. Phase 2, or get drones. Phase 2, phase 3, profit, right? That phase 2 part is what none of this stuff accounts for. It's what drones don't account for, long-range precision strike, and that's where land forces, to include Marines, are incredibly important and can't be sold off just to make room for all this stuff. All right, next slide. I think I'm going to skip this one. And then the last one here, my last slide. Go ahead. All right, so some things to consider. We have to be focused on generating and maintaining and restoring tactical and operational mobility. This is why I mentioned the air-ground littoral earlier. That's really what's getting in the way of mobility today. That and just the fact that a lot of forces are now like this instead of like this. And when you're like this, you can't really do things like move, which if you can't move, you can't do maneuver, regardless of what level you're at, all right? Then you're just fighting either positionally or attritionally. Hence, you have to understand positional and attritional warfare. Doctrine does not even talk about positional warfare, and it barely talks about attritional warfare, and when it does, it makes it look bad. It makes it sound like it's something stupid. And really, both of those are baked into our doctrine. We just call them things like frontal attack, turning movements, and other different forms of maneuver. All right, we've misapplied and overapplied the word maneuver because it's cool and it makes us sound really intelligent. All right, so let's see. So you have to understand those. That's the key. All right, you also have to build formations for those. So whoever leaves the room and someday ends up helping generate formations, that's one of the things you need to think about is these things are great, but they're the phase 1. Phase 2 is formations that can go control terrain, do that iterative engagement to change the mind of your opponent to quit fighting, all right? And you can't magic your way, you can't stare at goat your way to cognitive paralysis to do that, all right? You have to go fight hard to do so. All right. And again, the air ground littoral is key for that. That's really something I've started shifting a bit of my focus to look more at that and write more on that and do more research on that, because I think that's critical to opening up mobility, not maneuver, to help get things going again. All right. Zones of proximal dominance, that's the other thing we have to think about. We can't do everything everywhere, especially when we're trying to think through how do we do things outnumbered and when. Well, you have to have zones of proximal dominance, small areas that you're trying to dominate, not the entire battlefield, and then you iteratively move those things forward as you go. All right, so the last thing, so force structure, right? You also can't forget combined arms and joint operations, like was mentioned previously. All right, we really have to be thinking about that. Those are the elements that provide the ability to, and again, these ideas aren't new. Combined arms isn't new. Joint operations isn't new. Everybody does it. They just do it within their own means, right? But we can't forget it ourselves. All right, the last thing I would argue is that we have to stop with the institutional jargon because it muddies understanding. We have to speak in clean English as much as possible and quit applying the word maneuver, for instance, to things it doesn't apply to. Like, there are no maneuver forces. There's just land forces. Land forces do maneuver, they do position, they do attrition, they do all sorts of stuff, right? That's just an example, all right? But we got to try and do our best if we can affect doctrine or concepts or force development things in any way to speak in plain English as much as possible. So, with that, I am done. Thank you.